You
Mhm.
know, now that we're coming out, it's a little bit less glamorous than it was. I think we've learned that it's easier to shut down than it is to open back up.
Mhm.
Um, there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of free floating anxiety around right now as we all try to figure out what the next thing is. But I think the churches that are going to be best positioned moving forward are the ones that have continued doing the things virtually during the pandemic and are going to move forward doing hybrid right now.
Welcome to Sunspots, where we explore the many ways that the Holy Spirit is working in the people, places, ministries, and missions on the surface of the sun. That is, the Synod of the Sun. I'm Valerie Young, your Synod leader. My prayer is that you find inspiration, community, and connection in the Sun. A few days ago, I got to sit down with the Reverend Sallie Watson. Sallie serves as the General Presbyter for Mission Presbytery and has served at every level of the PCUSA. Sallie talked about her love of connections, specifically Presbyterian connections, and how the proud people of Mission Presbytery step up. Oh, and she says sweet tea is an abomination. You need to hear this. So, Sallie,
Valerie,
how you doing?
I'm just swell. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for being here. I'm so glad to actually be able to have a conversation with you um, uh, about you and your ministry. And we need to learn and hear more about your story. So, what is your story in the thumbnail?
In a thumbnail, let's see. I'm the youngest of three girls. I was born in Oak Cliff, Texas. I'm a lifelong Presbyterian, product of Austin College, Austin Seminary. What else do you want to know? That's my thumbnail, I think.
And well, how many congregations have you served? And you've served several mid councils now, right?
Holy moly, I got to go back and count. Let's see. Portland, Texas, which is closed now. Pines Church in Houston as associate. Upland, California, First Pres as associate. Community Pres in American Fork, Utah as interim pastor. Wasatch in Salt Lake City as interim pastor. Central Presbyterian Church in Austin as associate pastor. Let's see, if you count it, parish associate at University in Austin. And then I went to First Pres in Bonham, and I was their pastor for 6 years. And I went from there to start doing EP work. And I was the interim EP in Arkansas for about 18 months. And then I went to be the presbyter / state clerk for New Mexico. It was Santa Fe and Sierra Blanca. Sierra Blanca pulled out after a short while, and then I stayed, and I was the presbyter / state clerk for Santa Fe. And then I came from there to Mission Presbytery, where I have been the general presbyter now for 5 years and 2 months.
Wow, it's been 5 years already.
Time flies and you're having fun.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
I don't think I realized that you had so much experience as an interim. And this isn't part of our, but I would like to ask you, how is that different? Maybe you can hear the dog in the background. Yay. Maybe specifically the difference in mid-council work. What is the difference look like between interim and called? And this, may or may not make it, but it's a question.
Okay. I think the thing that I liked least about interim pastor work, either in a congregation or with the presbytery, is that at least my style is to invest a lot in relationships. And it feels like you're always saying goodbye. You're always saying goodbye. You get to know somebody really well, and you do the funeral or you do the wedding. And I complained bitterly about this to my beloved, and I told him, I'm just like, oh. And he said, honey, we're all interim. And he's right.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this day and time, especially, there are so many of us that say, well, I'm doing transitional ministry. I've been here 5 years, and I think I'm doing transitional ministry. Just the whole nature of ministry has changed. As far as interim in an EP role, I think people are nice to you and they are grateful for your leadership. Especially when there's the hard thing that has to happen, but it's different. Um, it feels like they know you're interim, and maybe you yourself know that you're interim, and so there's a little hesitation there. So it's like you're minding the store, but you're not getting too heavily invested. And I would say in Santa Fe and in here, I am all in.
Oh, yeah.
In a way that I was not when I was interim EP.
Right. You mentioned your beloved. Tell us about that.
Yes. Oh, my family. Paul and I are getting ready to celebrate our 29th anniversary this year. Yeah, time does fly when you're having fun. We are the parents of Alex, who is 23, and he is engaged now. So we're delighted to be welcoming Angela to our family. Meredith is 21. She'll be 22 this month. And let's see, Alex works for Toyota. Meredith is working for a local old family dance studio. And she is both teaching dance and also working in their retail outlets. And so her goal for years has been to either manage or own a dance studio. And so she's getting to know both ends of it, doing this. So that's great. And we are all run, organized, respond to Ruby the cat.
Okay. We talked a little bit about the difference between interim and called position, both in a congregation and in a mid-council. Why would you want to be a presbytery leader? So what's the difference between for you, what's the biggest difference between congregational leadership and presbytery leadership? What does that look like for you? How?
I would say that leadership at a congregational level is more granular. You really, the individuals and their history and who is dealing with what issue and all that. There's a whole lot more of that. And there also is a lot more routine. That Sunday has a pesky way of coming every 7 days. and it's kind of hard to, you get in that routine. There is a lot less routine, I would say, in a presbytery level position. And rather than being granular, we talk about it, we get the view from 20,000 feet. We get to see from up here what is going on. And that is what I love. That is what I love about doing this work. It is so much fun to look across the presbytery to the smallest congregation, to the largest congregation, to the furthest flung congregation, to the wealthiest congregation, whatever it is, and see how God is at work and the variety of ways in which God is at work. And you see lots of serendipities and lots of connections in the way that people are in their congregations. And I love it. I love it. It just, I'm amazed in a good way, just about on a daily basis.
So can you share some of those serendipities or share some of those things about Mission Presbytery specifically? You feel, to me, you've always felt very specifically tied to Mission Presbytery in a way that maybe not all mid-councils are tied to their area. Does that make sense? Like you have a real affinity for Mission Presbytery, the people and the places and all of that. What are the things that excite you about what you see in Mission?
Well, I definitely do. I mean, and I went to seminary here. I didn't actually go to Mo Ranch for the first time until I was in seminary. But then I made myself a deal. I said, I'm going to find some way to get here every year since then. And, I feel like the luckiest girl in the world to get to be part of a presbytery that has got hill country and beaches and Mo Ranch and a seminary and Trinity University and Shriner University and the Children's Home. And I mean, all the organizations that are here. Our friend John Evans said to me one time, he said that he thought that I had a real affinity for the organizations, the connections, the things that make us Presbyterian. And I think he's right. You know, I'm kind of hopelessly Presbyterian, and the connections are part of what give it a lot of meaning for me. And I mean, I was ordained here. This is my third time to serve here. So in a lot of ways, you know, I feel like I do know this place. Maybe an illustration is when I was being examined for ordination. I was a candidate out of Grace Presbytery, but I was ordained by Mission when I came to the church in Portland, and I was scared to death. You know, you're a new graduate, and I had my copy of Shirley Guthrie Christian Doctrine right here, you know, just about under my pillow. I was all ready for this exam, and I go in, and it's chaired by David Evans, and Eileen Dunn is there, and there was another guy that I almost want to say, I can't remember, but I almost want to say like was Charlie Schuler or somebody like that. And this exam I was so scared about. We sat in David Evans's study, and we had chocolate cake, and we talked about liturgical colors. Okay, I'm like, seriously, y'all? I mean, I was expecting this grilling, you know, and I don't know if looking back on it, I thought Mission is kind of a good old person presbytery, you know, not a good old boy thing so much, but they knew me. They knew me from Austin Seminary. A lot of them knew me from Austin College. They knew I was okay, and they treated me even from the start as a colleague. I mean, they did ask me some hard questions, I'm sure. I can't remember, but I just remember thinking that it was, you know, literally a cakewalk, you know, as opposed to what I had done before. And I think that's part of what I love about Mission is that there is this sense of collegiality, but there's also a sense that you can't get away with murder. You know, these people know you, and they want to be involved. They want to be part of the decision, and don't you dare usurp their responsibility. You know, they want to be able to kick the tires and to discuss something and to have their say, and you better let them do it. You know, and if you do something that belongs to them, you will hear about it. So there's, I think, you know, to me, there's a strength right there of being Presbyterian.
Mm-hmm. So many other places are not like that. So many other councils are not like that. And I'm working to pick my words very carefully. That oftentimes a council will just follow the leader. I mean, it's one thing to follow the leader, and it's another thing to follow the leader without doing your own work. And that's what I love about Mission Presbytery too, is the way that the leadership, not staff, but the way that the leadership owns what they do. And I've appreciated about them, even working with search committees over the years prior to you coming. I've really appreciated that about Mission Presbytery as well.
I will say I was part of the difficult COM situation yesterday, and we were on a lengthy Zoom call. It was well over an hour in length. I don't think I said two things. You know, I love the way that the staff, we're the staff. I love the way that the COM carries the ball, you know, and I will help with information, but I don't go in there and say, we need to do bam, bam, bam. You know, they look at the situation and they think, well, this is fair, this is not fair. And I think in one case, even in this call yesterday, I suggested something and they didn't do it, you know, and I'm okay with that, you know, and I tell them on more than one occasion, I'm like, you know, I'm not a voting member of this group. You know, y'all get to do what you want to do. And they do it, and they're proud that they do it.
That's
But
great.
that is what I love about them, is that, you know, I don't see myself as a spoon feeder, you know, or you have to come with me. I have to drag you along on this. Sometimes they're dragging me along.
Yeah. I would say there are a lot of leaders who struggle with that. I'll admit I'm one of them, that I don't see myself as a spoon feeder, but oftentimes there are times when people look at me and say, what do we do? and how many times can you shrug your shoulders before something has to happen? And so that's a very fine line. And I think you walk that very well.
Thank you. Thank you. There's another situation right now that we have a couple of committees in the Presbytery that are struggling. And I think that one of them we're just going to have to let die. And I'm a little, I'm sad about that. And I'm a little freaked out about it. But I also know that if something is allowed to die, what's important will come back,
Mm-hmm.
and it may come back in a whole different form. And so I think it will be a bit of a reckoning, perhaps, if this committee ends up dying. It won't kill us,
Mm-hmm.
but I think if it's important, it will come back in a different and healthier form. And so I'll confess to you that, and maybe to the world here, I don't know, but I'm confessing I'm white knuckling it a little bit, because it worries me, but I don't want to rescue it. And if others don't perceive the importance of the work, then I don't want to do it just to do it.
Right. And sometimes there are statements of this is an emphasis, this is a priority, but it's not backed by, sometimes it's not backed by the work that needs to be done.
Mhm.
And yeah, so how do you help to reconcile that? Yeah,
Well, do you
there are.
want to hear about that?
Yeah.
We are going to be working with a consultant. I'm trying to get all the details ironed out right now, but I'm working right now on the board of Mo Ranch, and I am beyond impressed with the strategic plan that Mo Ranch has in place. They have had it in place since 2012. And the only change to it came at our last meeting in March. They have 4 emphases. And the 5th one that was added in March, they added one to do with the environment, which, of course, for Mo, that's very timely and very appropriate. But from those 4 emphases, I mean, they have their mission statement and then the 4 emphases. And then from that, everything the ranch does points to those 4 emphases. And if somebody comes along and says, hey, I have this fabulous idea to do blah, 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 if it doesn't fit where they're headed, it doesn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm stealing that concept. And we're going to be looking at what are those 3 or 4 things that we think that Mission Presbytery ought to be about, and then figure out the steps that we need to do to get to those 3 or 4 things. And I think it's important to say, if something is a great idea, that's lovely, but if it doesn't really fit where we're headed, we can't we can't be all things to all people. We have to do what but Mission Presbytery is good at doing. And I'm my prayer is that this is really going to help us do that.
Mm-hmm. You spent some time as a leader of what you and I know as PLF,
Mm-hmm.
Presbytery Leader Formation.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that. First of all, what is PLF, or it's formerly known as PLF now? Is that right or no?
I don't know. I've been off faculty for a couple of years.
Okay, yeah.
This was a group that was put together by several EPs who didn't exactly have any training to do this work. Several of them said they had a 3-hour session and then were told to go for it. And they realized that, we might need a little bit more than that. So they sat together. Jill Hudson was one of those. Wilson Gunn was one of those. Betty Meadows was one of those. Paul Ryder had a big role to play in this. And they sat together and they said, what things do we think that presbyters need to know as they're starting this job? And so I was part of the very first kind of experimental group that they did. They envisioned it as a 3-year program, which it is.
Mm-hmm.
But this 1 week, they took elements from week 1, 2, and 3 and put them all in the week and just invited those of us who were new. And that was while I was in Arkansas as the interim. And it was valuable. And one of the most valuable things about it was the fact that we built colleague groups out of there. One of my closest colleagues now is our Board of Pensions guy, Kevin Keaton, because Kevin and I went through that first training together. They went from there and they said, well, okay, we're going to start this 3-year program. Those of y'all that have been through this don't have to come. But Kevin and I and 2 others said, well, we want to have the whole 3 years. And so they jokingly called us the remedials because we had to come back for another term. But it's very valuable time. I mean, not only are we given an opportunity to talk with experienced EPs, or whatever they call them now. There's a lot of names for this position, but we're given an opportunity to talk with them, to ask them how they would handle certain situations. They were able to do things like tell us how to handle a crisis, how to work with the public relations end of a crisis. Mm-hmm. One of the things I remember Jill Hudson saying was, you ought to have sermons in your hip pocket for the Sunday after a pastor leaves, for the Sunday after a pastor dies, for situations like that. She said, the Presbytery does not pay you to preach every week. Okay. But she says, you are going to have to preach. And there are times when you just have to go in there and have that sermon ready, and you're not going to have energy to think about it when the crisis happens. That's something I never would have thought about. Mm-hmm. And it's certainly something I've used. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So so the courses develop, and then better than that even is the collegiality. So after that 3 years, or even in those 3 years, you now know the person you're calling to do a reference check with. You know how to talk with them, and you know that they know how to keep a confidentiality, and the relationships you build are invaluable.
Mm-hmm. I've heard many mid-council leaders speak very highly of the program, and of course, we do everything we can to support new leaders who enter the program, and to make sure that search committees and presbyteries who are looking for leaders include that in their budgets and in their call, their call forms and all of that. So
yeah, thank you for that.
I hope you've been enjoying this episode of Sunspots, a region of the Presbyterian Church USA. We are Presbyterians in Arkansas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, and Texas, with dynamic and hopeful ministry happening in the name of Jesus Christ. If you have a good news story or an exceptional ministry to be highlighted, send that good news to sunspot@synodsun.org. Now, back to the show. So let's get a little more specific. What peeves? Have you got any?
What? No. Of course I do. I think my biggest pet peeve has to do this. Okay, I'm revealing myself as an English major in college. Has to do with grammar and punctuation. Makes me crazy. And I have learned from my children that you really don't use punctuation in texting because they think you're mad if you do. So I have kind of learned how to do that, but it still makes my skin crawl, but I'm trying to be aware of that and learn a new way to communicate. But that's one that just makes me insane.
Yeah. What are some mistakes you've made in your years of ministry that we can all learn from?
What was a mistake? We've talked about it a little bit already. Don't do it for a committee. Don't try to fix it for them. Let them do it. I think that's the biggest mistake that I make, and hopefully not as often as I used to, but overstepping. And that's easy to do because I have the right way to fix everything. And that is not true. Yeah, I know. But and sometimes the better part of valor is to let a committee come to that on their own, or instead to ask the well-placed question that would get them thinking about how they want to say that. But I think that's my biggest mistake, is overstepping. I think another mistake I have made in the past, and hopefully not as much now, is not responding quickly enough to an email or a phone call, especially when it's a when there's a, when it's a crisis situation,
Mhm.
and even if I respond with I gotcha, and I'll get back to you after I get back from vacation or whatever it is, I think just the not responding can be seen as you're being, well, literally unresponsive.
Mhm.
And that's not what you want either. So I guess learning that fine line to walk about how responsive, but then who is it? Was it Nowen that talks about the pastor being a quivering mass of availability? You do not want to be the quivering mass of availability all the time either.
Right. So not
But
fast is too fast, and setting
yeah.
people up to expectations
Mhm.
or quick response, and then how slow is too slow.
Yeah, just, I mean, not ignoring, you
Mhm.
know, but I've learned that, like, even if I'm out for a long weekend, like for the July 4th holiday, I put a responder on my email saying, "Thank you for your note. I'll get back to you on Tuesday."
Mhm.
Because I just don't want people to think, well, she's ignoring me.
So what are your, let's see, this is another unplanned question.
Okay.
You're a big time, and this might seem self-serving too, so Thomas, you feel free to cut this out. I know you as a very big supporter of the synod and the synod
Yes.
work. And I would like to know, I mean, you've described yourself as a cradle Presbyterian and everything that you do, being Presbyterian, but does that go with you everywhere? Not the Presbyterian part, but I mean, the support of synod. And is there one particular way that you've experienced the larger church, because you're active at OGA, PMA, all of those places, that keeps you active in the larger church? Does that make sense?
Some days I wonder what that is. My first synod meeting, like ever, I think it was while I was in Portland in my first call, and there was a synod gathering at Austin College, and I was all excited to go back to Sherman, but I went with a group of friends, and Bill Fogelman was the synod EP at the time, and
Mm.
I remember he started his remarks by saying, "What is a synod anyway?" And I was like, he's reading my mind. Why do we do this? Why do we have this? And it came around to him saying, even back then, this would have been 1990 probably. Even back then, there was conversation about whether or not to keep the synod level of mid-council. And he said, if you were to do away with synods today, something else would rise up and take its place tomorrow.
Mhm.
And I mean, I still remember him saying that. How many years later? Don't tell me how many years later. But I have found that to be true. I mean, even as we have gone through in the last 10 years,
Mhm.
discussion about whether or not to continue having the synod level. I think that there is importance in it, in that as we find connection in the presbytery level, the connections that we make across presbytery lines and across state lines are just invaluable. And I think we learn from each other. The thing that we were taught in seminary was that the role of synods was to enable mission that presbyteries could not do on their own.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's still a definition that's in vogue or not, but
Mhm.
I still see it. I mean, the definition back then was like Mo Ranch. At the time, Mo Ranch was very supported by the synod, and that was the kind of thing that no presbytery could have afforded to do on their own. But even now, as we look at PDA projects, as we look at other kinds of support, as some of the racial ethnic things that we do, I think that synod helps us to do mission that we as presbyteries could not do on our own. And
Mhm.
that's, I think, what keeps me interested.
Yeah, and that continues to be the definition of a synod network. I mean, the necessity the necessity of having more than one presbytery as a partnership, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and so you're super active you are part of the committee on the Office of General Assembly. And because of that, you're serving on PMA as well, right?
I'm no longer serving with PMA. I couldn't do everything.
Well, I can't imagine
Too
why.
much. I know it was too much. but I'm still on committee on office of General Assembly.
Mm-hmm. And are you enjoying that work? I'm not setting you up here. I'm really interested to know. I mean, is that just as it's obviously it's not granular, but it is in a way, right? Is it jot and tittle stuff, or is it, do you get to do the?
It is some jot and tittle stuff. It is also this year, very well. I was going to say as my mother said, the church has plenty of politics, and I've learned that over the years. There are plenty of politics at the national level. And I think maybe even more so that it's fraught with it, because you have people that come from all over the country, and some of them come with an agenda in mind. Some come to say, well, I want to make sure that we have good coverage on this topic or this topic.
Mm-hmm.
I was just kind of one that was coming to say, well, I'm just going to be here for such a time as this and see what we have to work on. But it's been difficult as we have had to deal with planning pandemic assemblies. I think we learned in 2020 what we should never do again. Mm-hmm. Although we were really scrambling in 2020 to try to pull something off, we didn't want to cancel GA altogether, but we had to figure out something to do. This year, we're trying to figure out what a hybrid would look like, and that seems to be that path is full of landmines. So we are trying still to figure that out. It's difficult work. And I think part of the difficulty of it is in a presbytery and even in a synod, the other people and how they're going to react. And even like maybe the culture that they come from, and, a lot more similarity. We've got people all across the board, which is good. We're shooting for diversity. We want there to be more diversity, but it makes the communications not delicate, but you've really got to communicate carefully, I will say,
and intentionally.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah,
much more intentionally. We talked a little bit about, or you mentioned about the virtual General Assembly and pandemic and all of that. So I'm interested to hear from you how what it feels like coming out hopefully coming out the other side of a pandemic for your congregations and for the presbytery. And I'm interested in hearing that from you.
Okay. For both, I would say we have 124 congregations. And of those 124, I would say that 85 to 90% did something virtual during the pandemic, during the height of the pandemic. Okay. And of that group, I would say that 85 to 90% of them reported to me that their attendance was stable to up, and that their giving was up to way up.
Wow.
And I didn't really expect either of those things. I had one of my pastors in Corpus said that he's been there 16 years, and he had a man who joined about 12 years ago that he's not seen since. But when the pandemic started, they were doing virtual worship, and he said this guy showed up and he was there every Sunday. And after about a month, he walked into the office with a nice fat check and said, "Thank you for doing this. Keep it up." I think that we have all learned that the pandemic has enabled us to minister in ways that we were not able to before.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a conversation earlier today with the small town pastor, and she said that they have two new members of their congregation. One of them is from Austin, and one of them is from Connecticut. Mm-hmm. And they had they've joined the church, they're members. Yeah. And she said in the last 2 weeks, they've had 2 funerals, and the lady from Connecticut came to both of them. And she was amazed. She's like, "Why are you here?" And she said, "This is my church. Of course I'm going to be there." And so we're discovering things like that I think we never even were able to imagine before. Mm-hmm. Now that we're coming out, it's a little bit less glamorous than it was. I think we've learned that it's easier to shut down than it is to open back up. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of anxiety, a lot of free-floating anxiety around right now as we all try to figure out what the next thing is. But I think the churches that are going to be best positioned moving forward are the ones that have continued doing the things virtually during the pandemic and are going to move forward doing hybrid right now. And, it doesn't take a bunch of equipment. It's not necessarily the most expensive tech and all that. One of my friends sets her iPhone on a music stand in the sanctuary and runs the service that way.
Yep.
But it's the fact that you're able to reach out from where you are. There are other churches that talked about their mission during the pandemic. They would try to collect food, or they would try to collect school supplies or something where they didn't have to get together and do things. But now they're starting to come back and say, how can we reach out and gather together? Some churches are still meeting outdoors because of the fact that children are not vaccinated, and they just want to keep everybody as safe as they can. So we're all kind of feeling our way right now. But I think the ones that were willing to be flexible early on are the ones that are going to really land on their feet moving forward.
Yeah. And how is the presbytery affected by the pandemic? I mean, what do you see the life of the presbytery looking like moving forward? Have you got a hybrid plan? Or
Yes.
Yeah.
At the very least, if we're asking our congregations to do that, we need to be able to offer that too. But not only that, but we need to do it. I think folks are through driving to committee meetings. We're even going to be offering hybrid committees. Now, some of our committees are eager to get back together, and there are certain committees that I think it's important for them too, if they can. But I think we're going to continue to offer hybrid committee meetings when we, the later part of this year and into next year, because we've discovered that people can participate better without having a 2-hour drive to get somewhere for a 2-hour meeting, then have to go 2 hours back home. So that's one way. We were able, fortunately, to slip right in to having virtual meetings. I think we had 4 or 5 since the pandemic started. We had called meetings, had the whole thing, and they have gone beautifully. We had our last full virtual meeting in June, and in October we're going hybrid. But in order to do that, we had to find a location that could support the tech that we need. We were hoping to have it at our camp, John Knox Ranch, but they are in an internet Wi-Fi hole where they are. Right. And we're like, if we're going to do a virtual meeting, we have to be somewhere where we know that it's going to work well. So we decided we're going to meet at Treasure Hills in Harlingen. They have been offering in-person, Facebook, I think YouTube. They also have FM Drive-Up Church, which has been a hoot. Yeah. But they have all the ability to do that. And so we thought this might be a way for them to show off for us and say, here's how we handled it during the pandemic. Can I tell you a funny story about that? And Thomas, you can edit this out if you don't want it. Laurie and I were, our state clerk, we were in the Valley a few weeks ago. And while we were there, Charlie Palmer, who's pastor at Treasure Hills, invited us to come to the FM service, which we could do before we went on to the other places where we were expected. And so you pull up in the parking lot and there's a big old sign, tune in to 88.1 or whatever the frequency is, and there were probably 15 or so cars out there. And there were a few people up in front that were in leadership, and that most of them were seated in the shade. It was hot that day. And Charlie had on his gray robe with the tabs, but he also had on a fishing hat, to help his little head not get too much sun on it, But they invited Laurie and me up, and I brought greetings from the Presbyterian. Charlie says, why don't we give them a hallelujah honk? And they were going, beep, 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 beep. Really cute. But he would do and say things during the sermon to engage people in their cars, let's tell Jesus we love Jesus. Let's honk, Anyway, there's all that kind of creativity, and I'm hoping that the Presbytery is going to be able to find a way to do the same thing, to offer a hybrid meeting with folks that are in person. It's going to affect how we do our voting, and we still are trying to work out with our leadership team what that's going to look like. It might be, we used to have 2-day meetings with an overnight. It might be that we do the in-person stuff and maybe mission oriented on Friday, and then spend the night. And then on Saturday, we would do all the things that required voting so that we can have all the viewers and all the commissioners in the room together.
Ah, okay.
So that's what we're contemplating.
Yeah, that technology is not easy.
Right. Right.
So are you reading anything right now that you'd like to share?
Yeah. Yeah. I've been reading for a long time, Barack Obama's new autobiography, but it's long. He is wordy. So I've been kind of reading that piece by piece. But the book that really has me interested right now is called The Address Book. And the subtitle of that is What Street Addresses Reveal About Identity, Race, Wealth, and Power. And it's fascinating. I've read the first 2 chapters, and the first one was talking about how the lack of address affects the homeless. That they are not able to get services and things if they don't have a home address to do that. And then it talked about a group in Haiti where there's somebody that goes around and is able to help them. I think it's somebody from Google even that works with the homeless to give them, or even people that live like in Colonias or whatever the equivalent in Haiti is, to give them a GPS address.
Oh, wow.
And they can give their GPS address, 3.141983 or whatever it is, and that can be an address. I'm only about a quarter of the way through the book, so I've got a lot more to read, but so far I just think it's fascinating.
That sounds super interesting. And I've written that down. We'll include the name of that book in the show notes for folks in case they couldn't get that.
Okay.
Fast enough.
Okay.
Your favorite beverage, adult or otherwise?
You have to ask me. Okay, margaritas are my favorite adult beverage, and my favorite non-adult, whatever, unsweet tea. Sweet tea is an abomination of the Lord and should be abolished from the earth. But unsweet tea with lime is wonderful.
And what's this thing with cows? I keep seeing you post on Facebook something about cows.
Started with our friend Conrad Rocha in New Mexico. In New Mexico, there's a lot of driving and there's not a lot of population, but there are many cows. Okay. And so the game that you play while you're driving is cow. And if you look over here to the field and you see a field full of cows, you say cow one time. You don't get to say 14 cows. You say one time. But now if there's a fence between some of these cows and some of these cows, then you can say cow, cow, and you get a point for each time you get a cow. If you identify a horse as a cow, then you're -2, and it can go on forever. But my family picked up this habit from Conrad, and it has continued in the Watson household, and I have brought it to the staff of Mission Presbytery. And my PDA person and my stated clerk will both text me from the road when they see cows on the road.
Tell them not to text and drive.
I know, but I'll get a text, and then also Ed uses his creativity, and sometimes he'll say, Martian, llama, or something like cow. But anyway, it's a lot of fun when you're traveling and there's a lot of boring scenery, or scenery without a lot of people and stuff. So you count cows. That's what that is.
Right. My mother used to. We used to count cows.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, you hit, I don't know, 100 or whatever, and you started. It was whoever got there first kind of thing.
There are times on my drives, even now, that I would get to 100 halfway to the destination. I mean, there are many and several cows out there, but anyway, try it. We'll try it sometime, Valerie. Let's take a road trip. We'll figure it out.
Okay. And we'll include a margarita at a stop somewhere.
If I'm not driving, yes. If I'm driving, I'll have iced tea, unsweet.
Exactly. Sally, thank you so much for visiting with me today.
Oh, it's been fun. Thank you, Valerie.
It's been a lot of fun. Please tell Meredith hello for me. And I can't believe she's 22.
She'll be 22 at the end of this month, and she's one of your biggest fans. She thinks you are just coolness.
I don't know where she got that idea, but please tell her I said hi.
I sure will. Will.
Thank you so much, Sally.
All right. Bye-bye.
In the Synod of the Son, we believe when we work together across boundaries, we make visible the good news and find wholeness as the body of Christ. In our common calling, we impact lives together. So let's remember to connect with, equip, and empower one another in the name of Jesus Christ, today and every day.